You think you know abandoned places. Think again. These decaying sanatoriums aren't just empty buildings. They hold secrets that will challenge everything you thought about medicine, madness, and the human spirit. Prepare to confront the unsettling truths hidden within their walls. Far beyond the typical haunted tales, most people see abandoned sanatoriums and think haunted asylum. But what if I told you their most disturbing legacies aren't the ghosts, but the echoes of medical advances that were far more terrifying than any phantom? Get ready to unearth the true darkness, a history more unsettling than any urban legend. There's something unsettling about silence in a place built for healing. These walls once echoed with coughing, prayers, and the quiet despair of those fighting for every breath. Now, only the wind speaks, and it whispers questions that history has never truly answered. What dark secrets do these forgotten halls hold? And what happens when compassion itself becomes a burden too heavy to bear? At the turn of the 20th century, as tuberculosis swept through cities like a ghost no one could see, sanatoriums rose on distant hillsides, isolated havens where science met superstition. They were built on hope, sunlight, fresh air, rest. But beneath the idealism lay fear, experimentation, and an evolving understanding of medicine that often blurred the line between care and control. For doctors and nurses, the cost was invisible yet immense. They lived among death and decay, carrying the weight of hundreds of patients they could not save. Before the term even existed, they suffered from compassion, fatigue, silent erosion of empathy, born not from cruelty, but from exhaustion and grief. In this series, we'll step into these forgotten corridors, places where medical innovation met moral ambiguity, where patients found both hope and horror, and where legends still linger long after the last heartbeat faded. From chilling patient diaries to revolutionary and sometimes unethical treatments, we'll uncover the true history behind these haunting institutions. But most importantly, we'll ask, what do these ruins tell us about the human cost of Kurand, the thin, fragile line between healing and harm? They called it a miracle of modern medicine. But behind the white walls and spotless corridors, the line between healing and horror began to blur. Before antibiotics, hope was measured in sunlight and silence. Doctors prescribed fresh air as if it was salvation itself. Patients lay outside in freezing temperatures, their beds lined up like coffins in the snow. Then came the pneumothorax procedure that deliberately collapsed a lung to rest it. Some patients survived. Many didn't. Heliotherapy controlled sunlight, exposure burned, skin raw in the name of cure. Sanatoriums became laboratories of desperation, where physicians experimented freely, often without consent. No one asked the patients what they wanted. They were subjects, not souls, bodies to be studied, catalogued, and recorded in medical ledgers that rarely mentioned the word pain. And as the years dragged on, doctors and nurses watched the same faces fade away, every loss carved deeper into their own minds, silent, spreading fatigue that no treatment could cure. For the patients, the sanatorium was both refuge and prison. Letters home were censored. Visits were rare. Weeks turned to months, months to years. The isolation was so complete that some forgot the sound of their own names. Windows locked. Rules strict. Laughter was discouraged, was thought to waste breath. In this world of constant coughing and whispered prayers, hope became an infection of its own. and the staff, trapped in the same sterile routine, absorbed the suffering like secondhand smoke. They carried the grief of hundreds, quietly unraveling behind their polite smiles. What we now call compassion fatigue was, back then, simply part of the job. Some procedures bordered on the grotesque: ribs removed, lungs deflated, spines carved open in the quest for a cure that never truly came. When antibiotics finally arrived, the truth was undeniable. Most of those years of pain, those miracle treatments, had been for nothing. The sanatoriums emptied almost overnight, rooms, once filled with desperate patients, now echoing with the ghosts of failed medicine. And for the caregivers who remained, there was no applause, no closure, just memories of the countless lives they could not save. And the haunting question that still lingers: how many were healed on? How many were simply sacrificed to the science of hope? These walls were built for healing. But listen closely, and you'll hear something else. The quiet architecture of isolation, designed not only to contain disease, but to separate the sick from the living. At the dawn of the 20th century, medicine and fear worked hand in hand. The sanatorium was the answer to both. Airy verandas stretched like open cages. Long corridors divided men from women, the contagious from the recovering. Windows faced the sun, not for beauty, but for control. These buildings were monuments to quarantine, physical embodiments of society's terror of contamination. And within them, compassion became duty, then routine, then exhaustion. For nurses and doctors, every hallway echoed with the same sounds: coughing, crying, the slow fading of hope. They lived in constant proximity to death, yet forbidden to show emotion. Walls were meant to separate patients from the world, but they also imprisoned the healers inside their own fatigue. Now, only time moves here. Roots crawl through the cracks. Where once oxygen flowed, what was once a place of life now smells of decayed. Every door left ajar tells a story unfinished. Every corridor swallowed by darkness feels like an apology never spoken. Do we owe these places remembrance? Or does forgetting them protect us from facing what they reveal? That behind every act of care lies a quiet cost, paid by those who could not turn away. Perhaps the crumbling walls reflect more than age. Perhaps they echo the unacknowledged burnout of the souls who once worked within a compassion fatigue buried as deeply as the bodies in the sanatorium. Cemetery, the buildings rot, and with them, memory fades. Names dissolve into dust, treatments into myth, yet each fallen ceiling tile, each rusted gurney, still hums with the residue of human suffering. We remember the architecture, but not the anguish, and in forgetting, we risk repeating the same blindness, ignoring the silent erosion of those who cared too much, too long, until compassion itself became a wound. These ruins are not empty. They breathe, they remember, even if we choose not to. They say some places never truly die, that the walls remember, and if you listen closely enough, the past still whispers back. These are the haunted halls of the forgotten sanatoriums, where echoes of medicine, misery, and mourning intertwine in stories that refuse to fade. Local legends speak of patients still wandering the halls, a woman coughing softly in the night, a nurse seen gliding through doorways long sealed shut. In the children's ward, toys are said to move on their own. In the surgical wing, Light flickers when no power runs through the walls. But perhaps these ghosts aren't spirits at all. Perhaps they are memories, human suffering trying to find meaning in its own silence. The fear, the grief, the endless routine of watching others die. It all left an imprint. These legends may be our way of giving form to the invisible, to the unresolved compassion fatigue, the unspoken pain of caregivers who carried too much for too long. Decay itself tells a story. Mold creeps where life once fought for air. Light filters through broken tiles like fragile memories. Is it any wonder that people feel a presence here? When a place has witnessed so much loss, it doesn't need ghosts to feel haunted. Every wall hums with history. Every shadow breathes with the weight of empathy turned exhaustion. This is not just the supernatural, it's psychological residue. The collective trauma of both patient and healer, suspended in the air like dust. But as fascination grows, so does the question: are we honoring the dead, or exploiting their pain for thrill and spectacle? Modern visitors call it adventure. They come armed with cameras, EMF detectors, and bravado. But some leave with nightmares, a heaviness they can't explain. Perhaps what they feel isn't paranormal, but emotional residue, a kind of historical empathy. To walk these corridors is to step into the psychological ruins of the human spirit. The sorrow that once filled these rooms doesn't disappear when the bodies are gone. It lingers, like the ghost of compassion itself, worn thin by centuries of suffering. Maybe the true haunting isn't in the walls, but in the memories we refuse to face, the compassion that turned to fatigue, the care that became a curse in the end. These places were built on hope, hope to heal, to cure, to save. But hope can be a cruel teacher. For every patient who found relief, countless others suffered, their pain dismissed as progress, their deaths recorded as data. And for those who cared for them, the doctors, the nurses, the orderlies who lived in the shadow of death every day, the cost was something no one wrote about. They came to heal, but over time, they too began to break. Compassion fatigue. They didn't have a name for it then, but you can see it in their eyes. The hollow stare, the forced calm, the quiet that comes when empathy runs dry. These were the invisible casualties of care, the ones who stayed long after the patients were gone, haunted not by ghosts, but by memory itself. Their legacy lingers not in the medical journals, but in the silence between the walls. Today, many of these buildings stand abandoned, crumbling, reclaimed by nature, their histories half buried. Beneath vines and time, tourists come for the thrill, ghost hunters come for the fear. But the real story, the human story, risks being forgotten. We must remember, not for the horror, but for the humanity. To preserve these sites is to confront our past, the desperation, the mistakes, the fragile balance between science and suffering. Because within these ruins lies a warning that healing without empathy becomes cruelty, and care without care for the caregiver becomes collapse. The doors are closed. Now. The halls are empty, but listen closely. You can still hear the echoes of breath, of sorrow, of compassion stretched to its breaking point. The past never truly leaves. It waits for someone to remember.